A familiar foe comes to town. Let's hope that we can have more success than Ryan Day did. Hey guys, Oliver here, aka UK Browns NFL, and this is my Week 9 preview of the 2-6 Cleveland Browns versus the 4-3 Los Angeles Chargers. And we're back. The Cavs are 6-0 and look like the best team in the NBA. And after a first positive week amongst Browns fandom probably this season, the Browns look to extend that positivity into the next 2 weeks with a win against the LA Chargers this Sunday. As I mentioned, a familiar foe for a lot of Browns fans this week with Jim Harbaugh coming into town. Thankfully, Kevin Stefanski isn't Ryan Day, so let's hope for a much better outcome this week than, what we've seen out of Ohio State the last few years. Kevin Stefanski announced that Jameis Winston is the starter for the rest of the season, something that I am personally happy about, as I've said since the Giants game that I'd rather see what we have in Winston the rest of the year. And if he plays well enough, he can be your bridge for whatever quarterback you do bring in next year, as you look to move on from Watson. So good to see him be handed the reins, and hopefully he can have a good year and somewhat turn this Browns season around. The Browns look to win their second consecutive game for the first time this season as they look to head into their Week 10 bye with a record of 3-6. The Browns have lost their last 4 games against the Chargers, having not beaten them since 2016 when they were actually the San Diego Chargers, so yet to beat the Los Angeles Chargers. As I mentioned, the Chargers are 4-3. They hope to improve on their kind of mediocre record when playing on the East Coast. As since 2019, the Chargers are 37-45 when playing on the East Coast. We all know how bad the Browns' record is when travelling to the West Coast, so thankfully this one is a home game. I think it should be a good game with 2 teams coming off of wins, and a game that I do believe that the Browns can win. Whilst the Chargers, have played well through 7 games, having a top 12 offense and as well as their defense as well, also top 12. They've also given up the least amount of points in the NFL with 13 points per game. But they haven't exactly been lighting teams up offensively. And, I do think they have benefited from a fairly easy schedule to start the season. The Chargers have beaten the Saints, the Broncos, the Panthers and the Raiders. But they've lost to the Chiefs, Steelers and Cardinals. I mean, it's kind of a classic Jim Harbaugh team. They win the games that they're supposed to win, but they lose the games against good teams. So I'm kind of kidding, kind of not. Take that as you will. Herbert this year has thrown 8 touchdowns to only 1 interception through 7 games. But his yards per game, passing yards per game, are way down than previous years, and his completion percentage is the lowest it's been in his career so far this season. Whilst the Chargers do have a more balanced offense than in previous years, I do actually think their offense is worse, and it's not the same offense that put 30 plus points up on the Browns in Herbert's previous 2 meetings against us. The Browns head into this game after a great win over the Baltimore Ravens last week, where they were able to limit the Ravens' somewhat juggernaut offense, as well as get their own offense rolling for the first time this season. And whilst I think the Chargers are a good team and they are a well-coached team, I do think that the Browns can beat them. I really do. So moving on to the injury report, for the second week in a row, I think the Browns have actually been beaten on the injury report. I joked last week that I think it was the first time this season that the Browns had less injury designations than the opposition team. And that is the same this week, with the Browns only having 4 players with injury designations. You compare that to the Chargers, who have 6 players with injury designations this week. As always, the Browns do still have more players overall on the injury report, something that will never change, it seems. But for the second week in a row, as I said, the Browns do have less injury designations for this game. So for the Browns, Jordan Hicks is out again, unfortunately. Did not practice all week. I think that, could possibly be an IR candidate situation. I haven't heard anything positive about that injury, so disappointing to see. Obviously, with that linebacker room being pretty thin, with obviously JOK also out for this game, did not practice all week after suffering his pretty scary neck injury last week. I'm not entirely sure how much of it is precaution versus how much of it is genuine injury. But I think we all agree that it's, after the injury he suffered, it's probably best for him to at least take 1 week out. So as I said, obviously with those two guys out, you are looking pretty thin in that linebacker room. Thankfully, I mentioned it in my Ravens review last week that Diabate had a really, really good game. So hopefully he can step up this week and kind of hold down that linebacker position against the Chargers this week, because our backup linebacker is also injured. Linebacker Hudson as well, another linebacker. He is questionable for this game. So as I said, we're pretty thin in that linebacker room this week. So we're going to need, Devin Bush, Diabate, these kind of guys to step up this week. And, I fully expect a practice squad elevation for a linebacker headed into this game. And then the final one, I suppose, the biggest one, Denzel Ward is questionable for this game with his concussion that he suffered last week. We all know the kind of story, 6 concussions now in 4 years. It is a worry, but as I always say, we aren't privy to the medical records. We don't actually know how serious these concussions were. So as much as we can be concerned, I do try and limit my, calling for someone to retire or whatever, when, I think that's a decision between the player and their doctor. Certainly not the fans. But obviously it is still a worry. He did not practice Wednesday or Thursday, but did return to practice on Friday. It's part of the concussion protocols rules now. The final step before being cleared to play is that you are cleared to practice. So with him being cleared to practice, I would guess that he'll be cleared to play for this game. I think it will just come down to whether or not he himself feels ready to play. If anyone suffered a concussion before, you know how that kind of goes, dealing with light, headaches, things like that. So I think it will be a case of seeing how he feels. It is quite rare for a player to clear concussion protocol, within a week and play the next game, but we have seen it before. So I think that's a waiting game. We'll have to wait and see. We'll probably get more information either later today or tomorrow on whether or not Denzel will play. If he doesn't play, of course, it is a big loss. Denzel, in my opinion, has been a top 3 corner in the NFL this league. He has truly been fantastic. Some of the tape, some of the reps he's put out there have been just amazing to watch. So it obviously will be a big loss. But I do think this week, going up against the Chargers with their kind of deficient wide receiver room, if there's any week that you want to just give him an extra week rest, this might be the week to do it. Moving on to the Chargers injury report, a couple of big names on this one. A couple of things to keep an eye out for. I mean, Joey Bosa is questionable for this game with a hip injury. He practiced all week, but only at a limited capacity. So interesting to see where that goes. He's been really good for them this year with that pass rush of him and Khalil Mack. So if he's unable to play, of course, that is always going to be a bonus for the Browns. Wide receiver DJ Chark is questionable for this game, looking like he will play after full participation in practice on Thursday and Friday. But as I said, that wide receiver room for the Chargers is already pretty shaky. And they're dealing with, even some injuries to those players anyway. So Kendall Fulton is out for this game, cornerback. Kind of not a big loss, massive loss, but it is a loss for the Chargers. He is a good player within that defense. He is out for this game with a hamstring injury. Denzel Perryman, the linebacker, is also questionable for this game. Did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. Limited practice on Friday. That would be a big loss for the Chargers as well on that defense. Brendan Rice, the wide receiver, as I mentioned, that wide receiver room isn't great anyway. And even the guys in there are suffering injuries. He has been ruled out of this game with a shoulder injury. Actually practiced on Wednesday, but then didn't practice Thursday or Friday. So I'm guessing his shoulder didn't respond well to practice on Wednesday. And then finally, tight end Smart. I'll be honest, I don't know who he is. He is doubtful for this game. Did not practice all week. He's probably not going to play. I don't think that makes too much of a difference in this game. But it's worth noting anyway. So that's the injury report for this week. As I said, for the Browns, Jordan Hicks is out. JOK is out. Hudson, the linebacker, who they kind of brought in to deal with these linebacker injuries, is questionable, and Denzel Ward also questionable with his concussion. And then for the Chargers, Joey Bosa is questionable. Wide receiver DJ Chark is also questionable, as well as Denzel Perryman, the linebacker, he is questionable. And then cornerback Fulton is out. Brendan Rice, wide receiver, is also out, and tight end Smart is doubtful for this game. So moving on to my 3 keys to victory for this game. My number 1 key to victory is balanced offense and to take advantage of scoring opportunities. Last week I highlighted the Ravens' poor pass defense and thought it was paramount that the Browns got their passing game going in order to win that game. And they did just that, over 300 yards passing and 3 touchdowns from Jameis Winston, did a lot to propel the Browns to win that game. But I do think this week we are going to have a bit more of a balanced approach on offense, going up against the Chargers defense that is top 12 in both passing yards and rushing yards given up. The Browns offense has come alive in the last 2 weeks after a historically bad start to the season, surpassing 300 total yards in each of the last 2 games, something they were unable to do in the previous 6. I don't think it's a coincidence that the improved offensive production has kind of coincided with a change at quarterback, as well as the return of Nick Chubb. Of course, the O-line being healthier has helped as well, but I think it's pretty silly to suggest that's the only reason why this offense, the production has improved the last 2 weeks. So I do think with an improved passing game and Nick Chubb being back, the Browns can be a bit more balanced on offense and, attack the Chargers defense both through the ground game, play action and downfield passing. Whilst this Chargers defense has been pretty decent, they haven't been world beaters by any means. They've given up over 200 yards passing in 5 of their 7 games, as well as over 100-yard rushing in 5 of their 7 games. So I think you can move the ball on this team, and especially with a balanced dose of both the passing and the run game. I think where the Chargers defense has been excellent this year is limiting scoring. As I mentioned, they're giving up the fewest points per game this year in the NFL, with 13 points per game given up. So whilst you can move the ball on this defense, they do a great job of keeping teams out of the red zone as well as out of the end zone as a whole. They've given up the least amount of rushing touchdowns this year, and they are 4th in the NFL with the least amount of passing touchdowns given up. They've also allowed the fewest red zone scoring attempts this year, with only 1.7 per game, and are only allowing touchdown scores on 41% of those red zone visits, which ranks 4th in the NFL. You compare that to the Browns offense that is only averaging 1.6 red zone scoring attempts a game. And it's easy to see where this could be a problem for the Browns. However, the Browns scored 3 touchdowns from outside of the red zone against the Ravens last week. So they don't even need to get into the red zone. No, I'm obviously kidding. But I do think the Browns can score on this team. Whilst the Browns are averaging the least amount of red zone attempts on offense in the NFL so far this year, they have actually scored on 61% of those attempts, scored touchdowns, which does rank 9th in the NFL. So I think the problem for the Browns hasn't been so much that they can't score in the red zone, but it's been more that they can't actually get into the red zone. With Watson at quarterback, the Browns couldn't move the ball, which resulted in such a small amount of red zone attempts. So I do expect that number to increase pretty drastically, as this season goes on the rest of the way. So as I said, I do think the Browns can move the ball against this Chargers team. They just need to take a bit more of a balanced approach on offense, in my opinion, against the Chargers defense that is susceptible to giving up yards in both the passing and run game. I want to see a mixed dose of the run game, play action, downfield passing shots, as I said. With the Browns likely being able to move the ball on this team, it's crucial that they do take advantage of their scoring opportunities. Let's make sure that when we do get into the red zone, we are at the bare minimum coming away with 3 points. If the Browns can take advantage of their scoring drive this week, I can see them winning the game pretty comfortably, to be honest. My second key to victory this week is to limit big plays and play consistently on defense. Through the first 5 weeks of the season, the Chargers offense was pretty anemic, relying heavily on their defense to, straight wins out of their games. However, in the last few weeks, a healthier Justin Herbert has helped this Chargers offense become a bit more explosive. In the last 3 games, Justin Herbert has 540 passing yards on attempts 10 plus yards downfield. And the Chargers also have 3 runs this year for over 40 yards, which ranks second in the NFL. So, they can have big plays. However, I don't think this Chargers offense is actually very good. They actually average less touchdowns per game than the Browns offense does. And we all know how bad this Browns offense has been. They are 31st in the NFL in red zone scoring attempts with 2.3, only behind the Browns with, as I mentioned, 1.6. And they are only converting on 43% of those attempts, with touchdown scores, which ranks 30th in the NFL. So, this Browns defense that has been one of the few bright spots so far in this team this season. Their stats are kind of skewed by the offense and special teams giving up, so many points and short fields this year. But overall, I do think this defense has been pretty good. That was showed last week against the Ravens, where they were able to limit a Ravens offense that was averaging over 35 points per game in their previous 5 to only 24 points, as well as holding their ground game to only 124 rushing yards when they were averaging 228 over that same 5-game stretch. So, this Browns defense does a good job of stalling drives and getting 3 and outs. So if they can limit any big plays against the Chargers this week, I think it will be incredibly hard for the Chargers to put up many points on this defense. We all know Jim Harbaugh likes to run the ball. They are top 10 in rushing attempts this year, but they're only 20th in rushing yards and 27th in rushing touchdowns. So it's not been as successful as they had hoped. And I think this Browns run defense has improved, especially over the last 2 weeks, partly due to the introduction of Mike Hall, taking over Quinn and Jefferson's rotations, because boy was Jefferson bad in run defense. I'll just say that. But, as I mentioned, they've only allowed 124 yards rushing last week against the Ravens' #1 rush attack. If they can have similar success against the Chargers this week, it will go a long way in shutting down this Chargers offense. And as I mentioned, this isn't the same Chargers offense that scored over 30 points against us in our last 2 visits. They lost Austin Eckler in the offseason. They lost Keenan Allen. They lost Mike Williams. So I think if the Browns can play consistent, on defense through limiting big plays, getting pressure on Herbert and keeping their ground game in check, then they could be in for another great day like they were against the Ravens and really hold this Chargers offense into check. And lastly, while the Browns finally didn't beat themselves against the Ravens last week, I am still going to tie that, that kind of narrative into this week, just given the opponent. So this week, my third key to victory is to end the Chargers curse, because this shit has been painful to watch over the last 8 or so years against them. The last 4 matchups, 4 losses, over 30 points given up in 3 of those games. 30-28 in the last matchup in 2022. The Browns had a lead going into the 4th quarter with Jacoby Brissett, but just completely crapped the bed on offense in the 4th quarter. And a field goal from the Chargers was enough for them to pull out a win in that game. You look at the 2021 matchup, that was even more painful. A game in which Baker Mayfield had over 300 yards passing, 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. A game in which Nick Chubb had 161 rushing yards on only 21 attempts. And a game in which the Browns had a 14-point lead in the third quarter. And they still lost. A third and early 4th quarter collapse on defense, kind of followed by the Browns offense just folding on multiple opportunities to go and take the lead in this game. And, they ended up losing it 47-42. And, it almost feels as if the Browns are cursed in this matchup. But hopefully that changes this week. I don't think this game is going to be quite the shootout that we've seen in the previous matchup, but who knows? It's a new year, it's a new team. Let's not repeat the failures of the past against this Chargers team. Finally get back in the win column and, get our first ever win against the Los Angeles Chargers, not the San Diego Chargers. So my final thoughts heading into this one, this would be a great win for the Browns headed into their bye week. 3-6, of course, isn't ideal, but I do think with the current landscape of the AFC, it's not impossible to see one of these teams that have had a disappointing start go on a run. We saw it with the Jaguars a few years back, 2-6 start, followed up by I think winning 7 of their last 9 games to make the playoffs and actually win a playoff game. So it's not an impossible feat. And, getting a win over a potential wildcard team always helps at the end of the year if it does come down to tiebreakers. So, as I mentioned, the vibes are pretty good this week. For the first time this season, another win on Sunday heading into the bye week will only further that positivity and momentum, which is crucial if the Browns are to go on a run to finish off this season. I, for one, am really looking forward to this game, something I haven't been able to say too many times this year. And as I said, I do think the Browns have a great chance of winning this one. And, as I said, if they can win it, go into the bye week with a bit more positivity, a bit more momentum than we've seen. And I think that would just be good for, Cleveland sports fans as a whole. A Browns win on top of this kind of amazing start to the NBA season we've seen from the Cavs. Hopefully an Ohio State win today against Penn State. And, Cleveland sports fans can hopefully have a bit more of a, happy and exciting few weeks to look ahead to rather than the previous weeks that we've been dealing with. So looking forward to this one. Should be a good game, and I hope you guys are too. That will do it for me today, guys. I appreciate everyone for watching. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. I'm very active on Twitter anyway, especially on game days. So if you are interested in seeing this UK Browns fan just shitpost about the Browns during the game, then come check it out and come and join in. As I always say, I'm just trying to create a community of Browns fans. And, even if I only get to talk to one Browns fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. So thanks again, everyone. Have an amazing day. And most importantly, go Browns.